Anyway, I now want to get to know your story. I introduced you as someone working at minimum wage. And by the way, I forgot to mention, not only you were working for minimum wage, but also your girlfriend was at the time was also working for minimum wage. So you guys. So tell me where was this happening? Where did you grow up, and then take us to that moment where you are working for minimum wage.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town right outside Chicago, in Indiana, a population of 22,000. I was a felon at 18, multiple felon at 18, high school dropout, no degree, no diploma. And I was working through a temp agency, which is basically where when you can't get jobs, you go to a temp agency and they give you jobs that no one else wants to do. So I was working for a place called Finitech Recycling Company, where I was a hand sorter, and I worked 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. Bottles like this on the bottom, there's a triangle with a number. That's the grade or the quality of the recyclable. There's no technology that can decipher the different thickness of mill plastic. So we basically hand sorted through trash. That's what my job was for minimum wage. And I met my girlfriend at the time, wife now, through a mutual friend. And I worked at night. She worked during the day. So I would go visit her and just bring her lunch or hang out with her sometimes before work. And she worked for an entrepreneur. She was an immigrant, by the way. Her family come from Mexico. She was working minimum wage. So she was an immigrant. She worked for a European immigrant who owned his very own business. He was a manufacturer of bath and body products. I didn't know that entrepreneurship existed. I didn't know that you could be a normal person and have a real business. I thought that you had to be inherited wealth or be, the Waltons. I didn't know that whole world existed, right? So I'm watching him sit, in the office with his legs kicked up. He's taking all the sales calls. He's running orders. They're making stuff. He's selling stuff. And I was just intrigued because he owned his time. And for me, entrepreneurship, what really was compelling to me is the fact that I could own my own time. I could be my own boss. So I started to study him, and then I started to finally muster up the courage to start asking questions. What do you do? How do you do it? And I was obsessive with asking questions. And I call this the breadcrumb effect. If you're trying to get around someone successful or someone who has a wealth of knowledge or someone who's where you want to be at, and you ask questions, they're going to plant breadcrumbs. They're not going to give you the loaf, because time is the most valuable asset. You cannot recreate, repurchase, or replace. Once it's spent, it's spent. And successful people understand this. So he would give me breadcrumbs. And what's happening is he was teaching me about the business. He was telling me stuff, and I was implementing it as fast as possible. And he kept telling me more and more and more. And I would fall asleep in his office like this. And he'd come back the next morning. What are you doing? I said, I had to do everything that you told me. I got it all done. And he'd give me more and more and more. Long story short, that's how we built $1 million business in 1 year. And that's how it worked. My first set of products came from him. I took products that he couldn't sell. It was color, fragrance mismatches, products that he wasn't selling or selling least amount of. And the whole Amazon thing started because he did business to business. So he manufactured, sold to people. They went and resold the product under their own private label brand. And people would take these products and they would sell them in house parties. They would go into malls and get physical retail locations. And he was an older gentleman. And I would hear him on the phone. You guys need to figure out how to do e-commerce, figure out how to build websites, figure out how to run advertising, figure out Amazon. It's going to be the future. And I asked him, I said, you keep telling these people this stuff and no one does it. How long do they last in business? He said, my typical reorder from business to business on new business is 3 orders. I want to get that to 12. And I said, well, if they did the e-commerce thing and selling online, do you think they would make it to 12? He said, absolutely, because the amount of touches and the amount of overhead when you have physical retail locations is preposterous. And online, it's an endless supply. They called it foot traffic in retail. He said it's endless online. So I told him, long story short, I have no money. I'm willing to figure this thing out. I took the scraps. I took the bad products, the stuff he couldn't sell. I started on eBay, then ventured to Etsy, and then got on Amazon. And that's when it was Vendor Express. They invited me to the vendor program, and I became an Amazon vendor. My first year, we did $1 million in business. It changed my life. So that's that's the whole story. And a little irony, if you remember, I told you I was hand sorting through trash with my bare hands for a company called Finitech. This was a large warehouse in Indiana where we grew up. My mentor had a small office on the other side of town. After that first year in business, I went from $1 million to $7 million a year in business. 7x the business, became his largest client. We partnered and we needed a different warehouse. We had 50 employees. I was shipping an 18-wheeler of inventory per week out of the warehouse. I got into business to business as well as business to consumer. B2C was on Amazon. B2B was on Google and on Facebook and on all the other platforms. And the warehouse that we got was Finitech, where I was hand sorting through trash for minimum wage. And my boss's office, who denied me a $1 raise, ended up being my office. So there's a little irony and a little story to say that your current situation is not your final destination unless you allow it to be.
Wow, I mean, this is an awesome story. And this thing about making your old boss's office your own, and their warehouse, their location becomes your location while you were working for minimum wage. This is a hell of a story, and you owe all this to simply going after this guy. I mean, he would have shared. Look, from his standpoint, it was a no-lose situation because he gave you the products that he wasn't selling anyway, or selling very little of. So he only had to gain commercially. But what you did out of your hard work and your perseverance, you turned that into something that is, unimaginable for you at the time. So really, it was an easy decision for him to support you, but you had to do the work, and ultimately that's what it comes down to, right? So you had to. They say that entrepreneurship is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. that's
That's good.
exactly what you had. Well, this is a hell of a story, and anybody listening to Josh, you better go check out his